I spent the entire morning in the kitchen preparing breakfast. My hands moved with practiced precision, the same way they had thousands of times before when Richard was alive and we'd host Sunday brunches for his business partners. Croissants from the French bakery in town, the one that opens at 5 a.m. and sells out by 9. Fresh strawberries and blackberries from the farmer's market, arranged on my grandmother's porcelain platter. Eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce made from scratch because Jonathan had loved them since he was 7 years old, and I'd first made them for his birthday breakfast. The Connecticut morning was crisp through the kitchen windows, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that had become my constant companion over the past 2 years. Not the heart condition I'd later claimed to have, but something else entirely. The weight of trying too hard. The exhaustion of pretending not to notice. The desperate hope that if I just kept giving, kept smiling, kept cooking elaborate meals, maybe Vanessa would finally see me as something other than an obstacle. Margaret had offered to help, as she always did, but I'd waved her away. I want to do this myself, I told her, and she'd given me that look, that concerned, knowing look she'd perfected over 15 years of working for our family. The look that said she understood exactly what I was doing and why, even if she didn't approve. At 8:45, I heard the sound of Vanessa's Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway. The same Mercedes I'd given her as a first anniversary gift, wrapped in a giant red bow, because Jonathan had mentioned she'd always dreamed of owning one. 20 minutes early, which surprised me. She was usually fashionably late to everything, especially family gatherings at what she'd once called, thinking I couldn't hear, the old lady's ancient mansion. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the front door, smoothing down my cashmere sweater. Navy blue, classic cut, paired with cream trousers. Even at 58, even when my heart was breaking, I maintained the standards Richard and I had set decades ago. Elegance wasn't just about clothes. It was about dignity, about presenting yourself to the world with intention. But when I opened the door, Vanessa wasn't alone. Behind her, climbing out of the passenger seat, was Brittany Cole, her blonde hair gleaming in the morning sun like she'd just stepped out of a shampoo commercial. And from the back seat emerged Madison Pierce, adjusting her designer sunglasses and laughing at something on her phone. "Morning, Eleanor," Vanessa said, brushing past me with barely a glance. She was wearing head-to-toe Balenciaga, the outfit probably costing more than most people's monthly mortgage. An outfit I'd indirectly paid for, since the credit card Jonathan used for her allowance was linked to an account I'd quietly funded for years. "Hope you don't mind that I brought the girls. We're planning a collaboration shoot later and needed to discuss details." Mind? Of course I minded. This was supposed to be a family breakfast. Just us. A chance to maybe finally connect the way mothers and daughters-in-law were supposed to connect. But I smiled. The same smile I'd worn to 1,000 charity galas when donors made inappropriate comments or competitors tried to undermine me. "Of course not," I said. "The more the merrier." I made plenty. They swept into my home like they owned it. Brittany immediately pulling out her phone to take photos of the foyer. "This chandelier is so extra," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or mockery. Probably both. The Murano glass chandelier had been a 20th anniversary gift from Richard, custom-made in Venice, worth more than Brittany's car. I led them to the dining room, where I'd set the table with my wedding china. White with gold trim, delicate and timeless. Margaret had arranged fresh peonies in a crystal vase as a centerpiece, their pink petals just beginning to open. "Wow," Madison said, sliding into a chair without waiting to be invited. "This is very formal. Do you always eat like this?" "Only when I have guests," I replied, already moving back toward the kitchen to bring out the food. Through the doorway, I could hear them talking, their voices carrying with that particular carelessness of people who either didn't know or didn't care that they could be overheard. "I swear, if Jonathan makes me come here one more Sunday, I'm going to lose it," Vanessa said. "It's always the same. Fancy food, fancy plates, and her sitting there looking at me like I'm some charity case she rescued from the streets." Brittany laughed, that high-pitched sound that seemed to be her only volume setting. "Girl, you're a saint. I couldn't deal with a mother-in-law who's so obviously jealous that her son chose someone young and hot." I stood in the kitchen doorway, the tray of food suddenly feeling very heavy in my hands. The croissants I'd driven 30 minutes round trip to collect. The eggs I'd carefully poached to perfection. The hollandaise I'd whisked by hand because the immersion blender was broken and I hadn't wanted to postpone the breakfast. My hands started trembling. I set the tray down on the counter, gripping the marble edge to steady myself. Breathe, Eleanor. You've handled worse than this. You've negotiated with buyers who tried to lowball you. You've survived Richard's death. You can survive a 29-year-old's casual cruelty. But then Vanessa's voice came again, clearer now, purposefully louder. Essa velha só sabe fazer comida ruim. Não sei como aturo isso. She said it in Portuguese, probably thinking I wouldn't understand. But I'd spent 6 months in Brazil in my early 20s before I met Richard, working with textile suppliers. I understood every single word. This old woman only knows how to make bad food. I don't know how I put up with this. The laughter that followed was like knives. All 3 of them, laughing at me in my own home, eating food I'd spent hours preparing, sitting in chairs I'd carefully selected from an estate sale in Newport 20 years ago. Something inside me didn't just crack, it shattered completely. Not with noise or drama, but with the quiet finality of ice breaking on a frozen lake. You don't hear it happen. You only know when suddenly everything is different. When the ground you thought was solid turns out to be nothing at all. I picked up the tray again. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in months. I walked into the dining room and placed the food on the table with perfect composure. Vanessa glanced up at me, her eyes completely devoid of guilt or awareness. She smiled, that practiced influencer smile she used in all her Instagram posts. "This looks amazing, Eleanor," she said, and I could hear the false sweetness dripping from every word. "You really outdid yourself." "I'm glad you think so," I replied, my voice level and calm, professional even. The voice I'd used when firing executives who'd tried to embezzle from my company. I served each of them, placing the plates down with deliberate care. Brittany immediately started taking photos, angling her phone to get the best light. Madison cut into her eggs Benedict without even looking up from her screen, scrolling through what appeared to be her own Instagram feed. Vanessa took a bite of her croissant and made a small face, barely perceptible, but there. A little wrinkle of her nose, a slight downturn of her perfectly glossed lips. Then she set it down and reached for her green juice instead, the one she'd brought in her designer tote bag. Because of course she had. Because nothing I offered was ever good enough. "I'm on a cleanse," she announced to the table, to her friends, to anyone who would listen, trying to detox before the shoot tomorrow. I stood at the head of the table, watching 3 women destroy breakfast I'd poured my heart into, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years, not since the morning Richard died in our bed, his hand going cold in mine. Not since I'd stood at his funeral and wondered how I'd survive the rest of my life without him. I felt clarity. "I just remembered," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. "I have some calls to make. Business matters. Please, enjoy your breakfast. Take your time." I collected their coffee cups, even though they were still half full, and walked back to the kitchen with measured steps. Margaret looked up from where she was washing dishes, her expression immediately concerned. "Mrs. Westbrook?" she said quietly. "Are you all right?" I set the cups down carefully in the sink. "I'm fine, Margaret. Better than fine, actually. I'm clear." I walked upstairs to my bedroom, the master suite that I'd shared with Richard for 30 years. Our wedding photo still sat on the nightstand, both of us so young, so impossibly hopeful. I looked like a different person in that picture, not just younger, but softer somehow, less armored. Richard used to tell me that I was too kind for business, too generous for my own good. But then he'd smile and say that was exactly what made me brilliant, because I could read people. I could understand what they needed, what drove them, what they feared. And that understanding was the most powerful tool any business person could have. I'd lost that clarity when he died. I'd been so consumed by grief, so desperate not to lose Jonathan too, that I'd stopped reading the signs. I'd stopped trusting my instincts. I'd let love make me blind. But downstairs, listening to my daughter-in-law mock me in Portuguese while eating my food in my home, something had shifted back into place. I picked up my phone from the nightstand. It was a Saturday morning, just past 9 a.m., but Gerald would answer. He always answered when I called, had done so for 25 years, ever since Richard first brought him on as our family attorney. The phone rang twice before I heard his familiar voice. "Eleanor? Is everything all right?" "Gerald," I said, my voice steady and sure. "I need you to come to the house. Today. Right now, if possible. And bring every document we discussed. The property deeds, the business contracts, the trust documents. All of it." There was a pause. Then, in a voice that held no surprise at all, he said, "I was wondering when you'd make this call. I've had everything ready for months. I can be there in 30 minutes. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than he could possibly know. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle in the way of old friends who've earned the right to genuine concern. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" I looked out the window at the grounds below. 8 acres of perfectly manicured lawn that Richard and I had walked together every Sunday morning. The rose garden where we'd renewed our vows on our 25th anniversary. The oak tree where Jonathan had built a treehouse when he was 10, and Richard had helped him even though he was terrible with power tools. This was my home, my life, my legacy, and I'd been letting someone treat me, like garbage. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said. I could hear the sound of voices drifting up from downstairs. More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as girl talk. The sound of Vanessa's voice saying something about old people and out of touch, and how the estate would be worth so much more if someone actually updated it this century. 30 minutes, Gerald confirmed. "I'm leaving now." I hung up and sat down on the edge of my bed, the same bed where Richard had proposed to me the second time, because the first proposal hadn't been romantic enough in his opinion, where we'd conceived Jonathan during a snowstorm that knocked out power for 3 days, where I'd lain awake so many nights after his death, wondering how the bed could feel so empty when I was still in it. I wasn't that lost woman anymore. I'd found my way back to something I'd forgotten in my grief. I'd found my spine. 3 hours. That's all the time Vanessa had left of thinking she had power in this family. 3 hours before her carefully constructed world came crashing down around her. I stood up and looked at myself in the full-length mirror Richard had installed because I was always forgetting to check my appearance before leaving the house. At 58, I still had the posture of the woman who'd built a fashion empire from a single boutique. Still had the sharp eyes that could spot a bad deal from across a boardroom. Still had the steel that Richard had always said was my most attractive quality. I smoothed down my sweater, touched up my lipstick, and went back downstairs with a smile on my face. I met Vanessa Hartley 2.5 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Jonathan had called me that morning, his voice vibrating with an excitement I hadn't heard since Richard's funeral. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come by tonight? I have someone I want you to meet." Someone. Not just anyone, but someone. I'd known immediately what that meant. My son, my careful, methodical son, who dated exactly 3 women in his entire adult life, and had broken up with the last one because she wanted to move to California for a tech job, had found someone worth introducing to his mother. I'd spent the afternoon in a state of nervous energy that surprised me. It had been 4 months since Richard died, and I was still moving through my days like I was underwater. Everything felt muted, distant, unreal. But Jonathan's call had pierced through that fog. My baby, my only child, was bringing home a girl. They arrived at 7. I'd made dinner, chicken piccata with roasted vegetables, because it was Jonathan's favorite, and I wanted this girl, whoever she was, to see that we were a family who cared about things like home-cooked meals and sitting down together. Vanessa walked into my home wearing a white dress that probably cost $3,000 and heels so high I couldn't imagine how she'd made it up the front steps. She was beautiful in that very modern way, all angles and contours and strategic highlighting. Her handshake was firm, her smile perfect, her eye contact just the right amount of confident without being aggressive. "Mrs. Westbrook," she said, "Jonathan has told me so much about you. It's such an honor to finally meet the woman who built Westbrook Boutiques." She'd done her homework. I appreciated that. Most people didn't remember the name of my company, even though at its peak we'd had locations in 12 cities and annual revenues of $40 million. Dinner was pleasant. Vanessa asked intelligent questions about my business, complimented the food without being obsequious, and laughed at Jonathan's stories about growing up in Connecticut. She mentioned she was from Boston, that her father was a dentist and her mother taught high school English. Middle class, respectable, hardworking family, nothing to raise concerns. But I noticed things. The way she touched Jonathan constantly, little proprietary gestures, her hand on his arm, his shoulder, his knee. Marking territory. The way her eyes would flick to the artwork on the walls, the antique furniture, the little details that spoke of wealth accumulated over decades. She was cataloging, assessing, calculating value. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite name, a performance quality to her warmth, like she was playing the role of the perfect girlfriend rather than actually being one. After dinner, as I made coffee in the kitchen, Jonathan followed me. His face was flushed with happiness, his eyes bright in a way they hadn't been since his father died. "So?" he asked, practically bouncing on his heels like he was 10 years old again. "What do you think?" I wanted to say. "I think she's not right for you. I think there's something calculated about her. I think you should slow down." But I looked at my son, my grieving son who'd spent the last 4 months taking care of me when he should have been living his own life, and I couldn't take this away from him. "She seems lovely," I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. She did seem lovely. That was the problem. It all seemed very carefully constructed to seem that way. "I'm going to marry her, Mom," Jonathan said, and my heart dropped into my stomach. "I know it's fast. We've only been dating 6 months. But after losing Dad, I realized life's too short to wait. When you know, right? 6 months. They'd been together 6 months, and he was already talking about marriage. Richard and I had dated for 3 years before he proposed, and even then I'd made him wait another year for the wedding because I wanted to be absolutely certain. But I looked at Jonathan's face, at the first real joy I'd seen there in months, and I did what I'd done my entire life as a mother. I put his happiness above my concerns. "Right," I said, and I hugged him tight. "Your father would be so happy for you." That part, at least, was true. Richard would have wanted Jonathan to find love, to build a life, to not let grief consume him the way it had threatened to consume me. The engagement happened 3 months later. Jonathan took Vanessa to Martha's Vineyard for the weekend and proposed on the beach at sunset. She posted 17 photos on Instagram within an hour, each one more professionally composed than the last. The ring was modest by my standards, a 2-carat diamond that Jonathan had saved for months to buy. I'd offered to help, but he'd insisted on doing it himself. The wedding planning was a whirlwind. Vanessa wanted everything big, expensive, Instagram perfect. A destination wedding in Tuscany. Custom Vera Wang dress, flowers shipped in from Ecuador. Guest list of 300 people, most of whom I'd never met. "She's excited," Jonathan explained, when I gently suggested maybe they should consider something smaller, more intimate. "This is her dream, Mom. She's been planning her wedding since she was a little girl." So I wrote the checks, $75,000 for the venue, $20,000 for the dress, $15,000 for the photographer, another $30,000 for travel and accommodations for the immediate family. The bills kept coming, and I kept paying them, because that's what mothers do. We give our children their dreams, even when those dreams make us uncomfortable. The wedding itself was beautiful in an impersonal, magazine spread kind of way. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfect that feels sterile rather than joyful. Vanessa cried during the vows, but I noticed she checked her makeup immediately after, making sure the tears hadn't ruined her look before the photographer captured the moment. For their wedding gift, I gave them the keys to a penthouse in the Upper East Side, $4.2 million, paid in cash. Jonathan had cried when I showed them the place, overwhelmed by the generosity. Vanessa had smiled and thanked me, then immediately started talking about renovations. "You didn't have to do this," Jonathan said, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. "But I did have to. Because my son was starting a life, and I wanted him to have security. Because Richard and I had built something substantial, and what was the point of money if not to help the people we loved? Because somewhere deep down, I hoped that if I gave enough, was generous enough, kind enough, Vanessa would see me as family rather than an obligation." The first year of their marriage was fine. Surface level fine. They came to Sunday dinners once a month. Vanessa was always polite, always said the right things, always posted photos calling me the best mother-in-law. But there was a coolness there, a distance that no amount of gift-giving seemed to bridge. I'd bought her a Cartier bracelet for her birthday, $28,000. She'd thanked me graciously, worn it exactly once for photos, and then I'd seen it listed on a luxury resale website 3 weeks later. Same serial number, same description. I'd bought it back anonymously through Gerald, not wanting Jonathan to know, not wanting to cause conflict. But that's when I started seeing the pattern. The designer handbag I'd given her for Christmas resold. The vintage Chanel jacket from my personal collection that I'd offered as a bonding gesture, posted online with the description, "Never worn from estate sale." My gifts, my gestures of connection, treated as nothing more than inventory to liquidate. I didn't tell Jonathan. How could I? He was so happy. He'd talk about how Vanessa was teaching him to loosen up and helping him enjoy life more. He was working long hours at the architecture firm, trying to make partner, and I could see the stress wearing on him. The last thing he needed was me causing problems in his marriage, so I stayed quiet. I smiled through the missed phone calls and canceled dinners. I pretended not to notice when Vanessa would check her phone constantly during our visits, barely listening to conversations. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was projecting my grief onto their relationship, that I needed to give them space to build their own family. But then, I'd started hearing things. Margaret, loyal Margaret, who'd been with our family since Jonathan was in high school, began mentioning concerning observations. Vanessa talking on the phone in the garden about how exhausting it was to deal with Eleanor's neediness. Vanessa complaining to friends that the old house was depressing, and she couldn't understand why I didn't just move to a condo and let them have the estate. The estate. The home Richard and I had bought 32 years ago when I was pregnant with Jonathan. Every room held memories. The kitchen where we'd made pancakes every Saturday morning. The library where Richard had taught Jonathan to read. The master bedroom where my husband had taken his last breath while holding my hand. This wasn't just a house. It was my life, our history, the physical manifestation of everything Richard and I had built together. And Vanessa saw it as real estate to be acquired and flipped. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Margaret was being overprotective, that I was looking for problems where none existed because I was lonely and grief-stricken and desperately afraid of losing Jonathan the way I'd lost Richard. But the truth was settling in my bones like an illness. Vanessa didn't love my son. She loved what he represented. Access, status, money, the kind of lifestyle she could photograph and post and use to build her personal brand. Jonathan was a means to an end, and I was just an inconvenient obstacle who hadn't had the good grace to die yet. The worst part was knowing that Jonathan couldn't see it. Or maybe he could, somewhere deep down, but he'd invested too much to admit it. The quick engagement, the expensive wedding, the life they'd built in just 2 years. Acknowledging the truth would mean acknowledging that he'd made a catastrophic mistake, and my son had always been someone who needed to believe he made good decisions. So we all played our roles. I played the generous mother-in-law. Vanessa played the dutiful daughter-in-law. Jonathan played the happy husband. And beneath it all, the foundation was rotting away, waiting for the right moment to collapse completely. That moment came on a Saturday morning in September, with croissants and hollandaise sauce, and 3 women laughing at me in my own dining room. Sometimes the truth doesn't reveal itself gradually. Sometimes it hits you all at once, with the force of something that's been building for years. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop protecting them from reality, even when it breaks your heart to do it. Gerald arrived exactly 30 minutes after my call, pulling up in his black Mercedes sedan with the kind of punctuality that had made him one of the most respected estate attorneys in Connecticut. I watched from the upstairs window as he retrieved a leather briefcase from his trunk, the same briefcase he'd carried to countless meetings with Richard and me over the years. How many times had we sat in his office planning our future, protecting our assets, building something meant to last generations? I met him at the door before he could ring the bell. I didn't want Vanessa and her friends to know anyone had arrived. They were still in the dining room, their voices carrying through the house in waves of laughter and gossip. I could hear Vanessa telling some story about a brand deal, her voice animated in a way it never was when she spoke to me. "Eleanor," Gerald said quietly, his eyes searching my face with genuine concern. He was 62 now, his hair gone completely silver, but he still had the sharp, assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading people and situations. "What happened?" "Come to Richard's study," I said, leading him down the hallway past family portraits spanning 3 decades. Richard and me on our wedding day, Jonathan as a baby, the 3 of us at Jonathan's high school graduation. All the markers of a life well lived, a family built on love and intention. The study still smelled like Richard's cologne. I'd kept everything exactly as he'd left it. His law books on the shelves, his reading glasses on the desk, the crystal paperweight I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. Sometimes I came in here just to sit, to feel close to him, to ask him what I should do about things I couldn't figure out on my own. Today, I knew exactly what he'd tell me. He'd say, "Eleanor, you're the smartest person I've ever known. You built an empire from nothing. Stop doubting yourself and do what needs to be done." Gerald set his briefcase on the desk and opened it, revealing neatly organized folders and documents. He'd prepared for this meeting with the kind of thoroughness that had made him invaluable to our family. "I've had these ready since the wedding," he said. "Richard made me promise, before he died, that I'd protect you, from everyone and everything, including, if necessary, from your own generosity." My throat tightened. Of course Richard had known. He'd always seen things I couldn't, always planned 3 steps ahead. He knew I'd try to buy her affection. He knew you'd do what you always do. Give everything you have to the people you love, expecting nothing in return except maybe a little kindness. Gerald pulled out a folder, labeled with the address of the Upper East Side penthouse. He also knew that not everyone deserves that kind of generosity. I sat down in Richard's chair, feeling the worn leather conform to my body. How many hours had he spent here, reading contracts, making calls, building the real estate empire that had funded our life together? "Tell me what we have." Gerald's smile was thin but satisfied. "Everything. The penthouse is titled solely in your name. Jonathan and Vanessa are listed as residents with your permission, which can be revoked at any time. The property has appreciated to $6.8 million in current market value." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. I'd listened to Gerald when he'd insisted on this arrangement, even though it had felt unnecessarily controlling at the time. "And the architecture firm?" "You're the majority shareholder at 62%. You invested $8 million 18 months ago when the firm was facing bankruptcy. The other partners believe the investment came from an anonymous venture capital group. Only Jonathan knows the truth, and he's signed confidentiality agreements as part of the shareholder structure, so I could effectively control whether he remains employed there. Technically, yes, though I'd advise against using that particular leverage unless absolutely necessary. Jonathan is genuinely talented, and the firm's recovery is largely due to his work. Punishing him for his wife's behavior would be cruel." He was right, of course. This wasn't about hurting Jonathan. It was about protecting him. "What else?" Gerald pulled out another folder, this one thicker. "Your current estate plan leaves 40% of assets to Jonathan, with the remainder distributed among various charitable foundations. Total estate value is approximately $68 million, including this property, investment portfolios, and the proceeds from the sale of Westbrook boutiques. $68 million. The number still startled me sometimes. Richard and I had started with nothing. 2 kids from middle-class families who'd worked ourselves nearly to death building something meaningful. The money had never been the point. It was what the money represented: security, freedom, the ability to help others, legacy. "I want to make changes," I said, "but I need information first. I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with." Gerald reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one unmarked. I took the liberty of having a preliminary background check done. Nothing invasive, just public records and social media analysis. After the wedding, when you mentioned some concerns, I thought it might be prudent. I opened the folder and started reading. Vanessa Marie Hartley, born in Brookline, Massachusetts. Father, Dennis Hartley, owned a small dental practice. Mother, Patricia Hartley, taught English at the local high school. Middle-class upbringing, nothing remarkable. Good student, graduated from Boston University with a degree in communications. Worked briefly in event planning before transitioning to social media influencing full-time. But then the report got interesting. 3 credit cards opened in the past 18 months, all in her name alone. Total outstanding balance of $127,000. Monthly minimum payments being made, but the principal barely decreasing. The spending pattern showed consistent luxury purchases. Designer clothing, high-end beauty treatments, restaurant bills that made my eyes water. She's drowning in debt, I said quietly, and hiding it from Jonathan. I checked his financial records with his permission last month when he asked me to review some investment options. His accounts show no unusual activity. He has no idea she's spending at this level. I kept reading. Her social media following had grown exponentially after the wedding. 287,000 Instagram followers, most gained in the past year. Her posts were a curated fantasy of luxury living, designer outfits, expensive restaurants, first-class travel. Every image carefully composed to suggest effortless wealth. Wealth she didn't have. Wealth she was manufacturing through debt and my son's credit. "There's more," Gerald said, his voice taking on a harder edge. He pulled out his phone and opened a screenshot of a text conversation. "A colleague of mine, someone who works in influencer marketing, sent me this last week. It's from a private forum where influencers discuss strategy." I read the messages, each one landing like a physical blow. Vanessa had written, "Married into serious old money. Mill is loaded but won't die already, LOL. Playing the long game, though. Once we have a baby, she literally can't cut us out." Another message from 3 months ago. "The trick is making them think it's their idea. I don't ask for anything directly. I just mention how much I admire something, or how much it would mean to me, and boom, she writes a check. It's actually kind of pathetic how desperate she is for me to like her." And then, most damning, "Jonathan is sweet but honestly kind of boring. Worth it for the lifestyle, though. His mom's estate alone is worth like 50 mil easy. Just gotta keep her happy until she kicks it, then we're set." I set the phone down carefully, my hands remarkably steady despite the rage burning through my veins. This wasn't just casual cruelty or thoughtless unkindness. This was calculated exploitation. Vanessa had identified me as a mark, assessed my vulnerabilities, and executed a long-term con using my son as the access point. "How long have you had this?" I asked. 2 weeks. I've been debating whether to show you, whether it would cause more harm than good. But after your call this morning, I knew you were ready to see the truth." Ready? What a strange word for it. Was anyone ever ready to discover that someone had been systematically manipulating them? That their grief and loneliness and desperate desire for family had been weaponized against them? "I need more," I said. "I need everything. Financial records, social media activity, text messages, if we can legally obtain them. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with before I make any moves." Gerald nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I have a private investigator on retainer. Very discreet, very thorough. Former FBI white-collar crime division. If there's anything to find, she'll find it." "How long?" "Give me a week, maybe 2. She'll need to be careful. Do everything by the book. The last thing we want is for this to come back on you legally." A week. I could maintain the facade for a week. I'd been maintaining it for 2 years already. What was another 7 days? "In the meantime," Gerald said, closing his briefcase, "I'd recommend you start making some quiet changes to your estate plan. Nothing dramatic that would raise red flags, but laying groundwork, creating trusts with specific conditions, updating beneficiary designations, standard maintenance that wouldn't seem unusual for someone your age. Make an appointment for early next week," I said. "I want everything restructured. And Gerald, make sure everything is airtight. If this goes to court, I don't want a single vulnerability." "Eleanor," he said gently, "are you sure you want to go to war with your son's wife? This could destroy your relationship with Jonathan." The question hung in the air between us. Was I willing to risk losing my son to save him from a woman who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket? Was maternal love supposed to be unconditional acceptance, even when that acceptance enabled someone to hurt your child? Richard always said the hardest part of loving someone is knowing when to let them fall, I said quietly. Jonathan needs to see who he married, not from me telling him, not from accusations or ultimatums. He needs to see it himself, in a way he can't deny or rationalize away. That's a dangerous game. Then it's a good thing I've been playing dangerous games my whole life. I stood up, smoothing down my sweater. I built a multi-million-dollar business in an industry that thought women were only good for modeling the clothes, not designing or selling them. I survived Richard's death without falling apart. I can handle one spoiled influencer who thinks she's cleverer than she actually is. Gerald stood as well, studying me with something that looked like admiration mixed with concern. You know, Richard used to say you were the most dangerous person he'd ever met. Not because you were cruel or vindictive, but because you played the long game better than anyone. You'd let people underestimate you, let them think they'd won, and then suddenly they'd realize they'd been outmaneuvered 3 moves ago. He did love his chess metaphors. This isn't chess, Eleanor. This is your family, which is exactly why I can't afford to lose. I walked him to the door, checking first to make sure Vanessa and her friends were still occupied in the dining room. Their laughter floated through the house, carefree and oblivious. They had no idea the ground had just shifted beneath their feet. After Gerald left, I stood in the foyer for a long moment, looking at the family photographs arranged on the antique console table. Jonathan at every age, every milestone. His first day of school, his college graduation, his wedding day, standing next to Vanessa in her $75,000 dress, both of them smiling for a photographer who'd charged $8,000 for the day. I'd given them everything. Money, property, connections, unconditional support. And in return, Vanessa had given me contempt disguised as courtesy, while systematically planning to exploit my death for financial gain. The sound of Vanessa's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Eleanor? Where did you go? We're ready for those mimosas you promised. I hadn't promised any mimosas, but I pasted on my smile and walked back to the dining room. Coming, darling. Just had to take a quick call. Business never really stops, even in retirement. The 3 of them were sprawled around the table now, shoes kicked off, phones out, completely at ease in my home. Vanessa had her feet up on one of my antique chairs, her designer heels lying carelessly on the Persian rug that Richard and I had bought on our anniversary trip to Istanbul. Must be nice, Madison said, not looking up from her phone. Being so rich you can just retire at like 50. 58, I corrected gently, moving to the bar cart to prepare drinks I didn't want to make for people I didn't want in my house. And it wasn't exactly a choice. After my husband died, running the business didn't have the same appeal. Right, sorry, Madison said, still not making eye contact. The apology was reflexive, meaningless. Brittany was taking photos of the table, the food, the room. This place is so aesthetic, she said. Very old money vibes. Vanessa, we should do a shoot here sometime. Your followers would eat this up. Maybe, Vanessa said, catching my eye with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. If Eleanor doesn't mind us invading her space. Of course not, I lied smoothly, pouring champagne into crystal flutes that had been wedding gifts from Richard's parents. Family is always welcome. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. This woman who'd married my son, who lived in a home I'd bought, who wore clothes purchased with money I'd provided, who was planning to celebrate my death as a financial windfall. This was who Jonathan had chosen to build a life with. But as I served the mimosas and listened to them gossip about other influencers and brand deals and follower counts, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, though there was plenty of that. Not hurt, though that was there too. What I felt was the cold, clear certainty that came from finally seeing a situation exactly as it was. Vanessa thought she was playing me, but she'd forgotten the most fundamental rule of any con. You can't cheat someone who knows they're being cheated. You can only cheat someone who wants to believe in you. And I was done believing in her. I was done being the desperate widow, so hungry for family that I'd tolerate anything. Done being the convenient ATM machine. Done pretending I didn't see what was right in front of my face. Vanessa raised her mimosa in a toast. To family, she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. I raised my glass and smiled. To family, I echoed. And to getting exactly what we deserve. She didn't catch the double meaning. None of them did. They clinked glasses and went back to their phones and their conversation, completely unaware that they'd just toasted their own downfall. In chess, Richard used to tell me, the most important moves are the ones your opponent doesn't see coming. The quiet repositioning of pieces, the subtle shifts in strategy. By the time they realize what's happening, the game is already over. I was done playing defense. It was time to remind everyone why Eleanor Westbrook had never lost a business negotiation in 30 years, and I sure as hell wasn't about to start losing now. The investigation took exactly 9 days. 9 days of maintaining my smile, hosting dinners, answering Vanessa's suddenly frequent calls with patience I didn't feel. 9 days of watching her performance of daughterly affection, knowing exactly what motivated every sugary word and calculated gesture. She'd started calling me Mom Eleanor on Instagram, posted throwback photos from their wedding with captions about family blessings and grateful for this amazing woman. Her followers ate it up, commenting about how lucky she was to have such a generous mother-in-law, how beautiful our relationship was, how they wished their in-laws were half as supportive. If they only knew. Gerald called on a Thursday afternoon. "We need to meet. My office. And Eleanor, you'll want to sit down for this." I drove into the city the next morning, telling Margaret I had a meeting with my financial advisor. Not entirely a lie. Gerald had been managing our family's money for a quarter century. He knew where every dollar lived, every investment we'd ever made, every trust we'd ever established. His office overlooked Central Park, all dark wood and leather, and the kind of understated elegance that whispered old money rather than shouting it. He was waiting with a woman I didn't recognize. Late 40s, sharp eyes, wearing a suit that meant business. "Eleanor, this is Patricia Chen, former FBI, now private investigation. She's been looking into Vanessa's activities." Patricia shook my hand with a firm grip. "Mrs. Westbrook, I have to say, in 20 years of investigating fraud and financial crimes, I've rarely seen anything quite this calculated from someone so young." She opened a laptop and turned it to face me. "Let's start with the finances. Your daughter-in-law has 7 credit cards, not 3. Total debt is actually closer to $200,000. She's been making minimum payments by taking cash advances on new cards. It's a house of cards that's about to collapse." I studied the spreadsheets she showed me. Purchases at Bergdorf Goodman, Saks, Neiman Marcus. $10,000 at a medical spa for procedures Jonathan didn't know about. $15,000 for a handbag. $8,000 for a weekend trip to Miami with Brittany and Madison while telling Jonathan she was visiting her sick grandmother in Boston. "But here's where it gets interesting," Patricia continued, clicking to another document. "She's been in contact with a divorce attorney for the past 6 weeks." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" "She hasn't filed anything. She's in the consultation phase, but the emails are clear. She's asking about asset division in Connecticut, how long she'd need to stay married to qualify for alimony, what happens to gifts given during marriage." Patricia pulled up a screenshot of an email. "This is from 3 weeks ago. She specifically asked about the penthouse and whether it would be considered marital property." I read the email, my hands trembling slightly. Vanessa had written, "My mother-in-law gave us an apartment as a wedding gift. It's worth about $7 million now. In a divorce, would I be entitled to half? Also, my husband doesn't know about debts I've accumulated. Would I be responsible for those alone, or would they be considered marital debt?" "She's planning her exit," I said quietly. "She's already spent everything she can get her hands on, and now she's looking to cash out." "That's not all." Patricia clicked to another file. "We found the conception plan. She stopped taking birth control 6 weeks ago without telling Jonathan. She has a calendar on her phone tracking her cycle, optimal conception windows. There are texts to Brittany saying once she's pregnant, you can't cut her out of the will, that a grandchild would guarantee her financial security." The room tilted slightly, not from shock anymore, from pure, crystalline rage. Vanessa wasn't just planning to trap my son with a baby. She was planning to use my grandchild as a bargaining chip, a guarantee of permanent financial access. "There's one more thing," Gerald said, his voice careful. "Patricia found some concerning messages about you specifically, about your health." Patricia pulled up another screenshot. Text messages between Vanessa and someone named Marcus, who appeared to be a personal trainer or life coach she'd been seeing. The messages made my blood run cold. Vanessa had written, "She's 58 with a family history of heart disease. Her husband dropped dead at 54. I give her maybe 10 more years tops. Just need to hold on until then." Marcus had responded, "That's dark even for you." Vanessa's reply, "It's realistic. And honestly, the sooner the better. Jonathan is so much easier to manipulate when he's sad." After she goes, I'll have him completely dependent on me emotionally. Plus, that house is worth 15 mil easy. I set the phone down very carefully. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were perfectly steady. The rage had crystallized into something cold and hard and absolutely certain. She's not just planning to divorce my son, I said quietly. She's planning to wait for me to die first, maximize her payout, and then leave him emotionally destroyed and financially devastated. That's our assessment, yes, Patricia said. Mrs. Westbrook, in my professional opinion, this woman is a sociopath, or at minimum, someone with severe narcissistic personality disorder. The level of calculation here, the complete lack of empathy, the way she systematically isolated your son from his support system while positioning herself as indispensable, it's textbook predatory behavior. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over Central Park. Autumn was coming. The leaves were just beginning to turn, gold and red against the green. Richard and I used to walk through the park every time we came into the city. He'd hold my hand, and we'd plan our future, our retirement. Growing old together, watching Jonathan find love, build a family, create his own version of what we'd had. This wasn't what we'd dreamed. This wasn't what I'd survived his death to see. I turned back to Gerald and Patricia. I want to talk to Jonathan, but not yet. First, I need to set up a situation where Vanessa reveals herself. I need him to see who she really is, not hear it from me. If I tell him, she'll twist it. She'll make me the villain. She'll say I'm trying to break them up because I'm jealous or controlling or still grieving Richard and can't let Jonathan go. What did you have in mind? Gerald asked. I smiled, and I could see both of them react to it. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile I'd worn in boardrooms when competitors thought they'd outmaneuvered me. The smile that meant I'd already won and I was just waiting for them to realize it. I'm going to have a family dinner, I said. Just the three of us. And I'm going to announce some changes to my estate plan, changes that will make Vanessa think she's about to lose everything. People reveal their true nature when they're desperate. We're going to make her very, very desperate. That's risky, Patricia warned. If she's as calculating as I think she is, she might call your bluff. She won't, I said with absolute certainty. Because I know something about Vanessa that she doesn't know about herself. She's not as smart as she thinks she is. She's been getting away with this because I've been letting her, because Jonathan loves her and wants to believe the best. But the minute she thinks her meal ticket is disappearing, she'll panic. And when people panic, they make mistakes. Gerald was already pulling out his calendar. When? Saturday night, 1 week from tomorrow. That gives me time to prepare everything, to make sure when this happens, it happens exactly the way I need it to. I looked at the evidence spread across Gerald's desk. Text messages, financial records, consultation emails with divorce attorneys. 2 years of systematic manipulation and exploitation documented in excruciating detail. Vanessa thought she was running a long con, but she'd made one critical miscalculation. She'd assumed that because I was grieving, because I was desperate for family, because I was generous with my money, that I was weak. She'd forgotten that weak women don't build multi-million-dollar empires. They don't survive the death of their soulmate and come out intact. They don't negotiate with sharks and win. I wasn't weak. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to prove it. And that moment was coming in exactly 7 days. I spent the week preparing with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that had made Westbrook Boutiques legendary. Every element needed to be perfect. Every word I'd say rehearsed until it sounded natural. Every document reviewed until I could recite the contents from memory. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was the most important performance of my life. Saturday morning, I called Jonathan. Sweetheart, I'd love to have you and Vanessa over tonight, just the three of us. Something I need to discuss with you both. There was a pause. Is everything okay, Mom? Everything's fine. I just want to talk about some estate planning matters. Nothing to worry about. But at my age, it's important to keep these things current. I kept my voice light, unconcerned. Say 7 o'clock? I'll make your favorite pot roast. You don't have to go to all that trouble. It's not trouble. It's what mothers do. The words came easily, naturally, because they were true. Everything I was about to do, I was doing because I was his mother. Because protecting your child sometimes means destroying the thing they think they love. They arrived promptly at 7. Vanessa wore a dress I recognized from her Instagram, a cream-colored designer piece that had cost $4,500 according to Patricia's report. Money she didn't have, charged to a card that was nearly maxed out. She kissed my cheek with practiced warmth. "Mom, Eleanor, something smells amazing. You really are the best cook." The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 weeks ago she'd called my food ruim to her friends. Now she was complimenting it to my face. The mask was so perfect, so seamlessly maintained. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed her. We sat in the formal dining room, the same room where she'd humiliated me. I'd set the table with my best china, lit candles, created the atmosphere of a special family occasion. Jonathan was relaxed, happy even, talking about a project at work. Vanessa was attentive to him, touching his hand, laughing at his stories, playing the devoted wife with Oscar-worthy skill. I served dinner and let them eat, let them settle into comfort. Let Vanessa think this was just another evening of me playing the generous matriarch while she played the grateful daughter-in-law. The pot roast was perfect. I'd made it exactly the way Richard had taught me 30 years ago, slow-cooked until the meat fell apart. "This is incredible, Mom," Jonathan said, and the genuine love in his voice nearly broke my resolve. He looked so much like his father in that moment. The same kind eyes, the same easy smile. Richard would have hated what I was about to do, but he also would have understood why it was necessary. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." I set down my fork and folded my hands. "I asked you both here tonight because I need to discuss something important. As you know, I've been reviewing my estate plan with Gerald." Vanessa's attention sharpened immediately. I saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way her hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her wine glass. There it was, the thing she'd been waiting for, planning for, building her entire strategy around. "I've made some significant changes," I continued, keeping my voice matter-of-fact, businesslike. "At 58, with the same heart condition that took Richard from us, I need to be responsible about these things." "Mom, you don't have a heart condition," Jonathan said, concern flooding his face. "Actually, I do. I was diagnosed 3 months ago. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but it's genetic. The same condition your father had. The doctors are monitoring it closely." The lie came smoothly, rehearsed to perfection. Gerald had even created false medical records, just in case Vanessa tried to verify. We were leaving nothing to chance. I watched Vanessa's face carefully. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw something flash in her eyes. Not concern, not worry for my well-being. Something else entirely. Calculation. The mental math of timelines and inheritance and how this changed her plans. "Oh my God, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Why didn't you tell us? We would have been there for you. You shouldn't go through this alone." I didn't want to worry anyone, and as I said, it's being managed. But it did make me realize I need to update my plans. I pulled out a folder I'd placed on the sideboard earlier. "I wanted you both to understand the changes I'm making." Jonathan looked like he wanted to interrupt, to talk more about my supposed health condition, but I pressed forward. Momentum was everything now. The estate is currently valued at approximately $68 million. That includes this property, investment portfolios, and various other assets. I opened the folder, pulling out documents that looked official because they were official. Everything Gerald and I had prepared was legally binding. I've decided to restructure everything into a charitable trust. The silence that fell over the table was deafening. I could hear the antique clock in the corner ticking, each second marking the detonation of Vanessa's carefully constructed plans. "A charitable trust?" Jonathan said slowly. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that upon my death, the bulk of the estate will go to various foundations and charities. The Westbrook Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs, which I'm establishing to help other women build businesses. Scholarships for underprivileged students. Medical research. The causes your father and I always cared about." "And what about Jonathan?" Vanessa's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath. "What about your son?" "Jonathan will receive a trust fund that provides a comfortable income, $200,000 a year for life, more than enough to live well, but not so much that he loses motivation to build his own legacy." I looked at my son, who seemed more confused than upset. "Your father and I always believed in earned success, not inherited wealth. We wanted you to build something yourself, the way we did. Mom, I don't care about the money, Jonathan started, but Vanessa cut him off. 200,000? Her voice had gone up an octave. She caught herself, modulated back to false calm. I mean, that's generous, of course, but Eleanor, Jonathan is your only child, your only family. Surely he should inherit more than what amounts to a stipend. He'll also receive some personal items of sentimental value. His father's watch collection, family photographs, things that matter more than money. I turned to Jonathan. Sweetheart, you have a successful career. You're talented and hardworking. You don't need my money to build a good life. I know that, Mom. I've never expected— What about the apartment? Vanessa interrupted again, her mask slipping further. The penthouse you gave us? The penthouse remains in my name. It's part of the estate and will be sold, with proceeds going to the charitable trust. However, you and Jonathan can continue living there for a reasonable period while you find your own place. I'm not going to make you homeless. I smiled at her, warm and maternal. I know how much you love that apartment. Vanessa's face had gone pale under her expertly applied makeup. But we've made it our home. We've invested in renovations. Renovations I paid for, if I recall correctly. My voice remained gentle, but there was steel underneath. I covered the $150,000 for the kitchen remodel, the master bathroom, the custom closets, all of it. Of course, and we're so grateful, she started, but I wasn't finished. I've also decided to divest from Jonathan's architecture firm. It's time for the company to stand on its own merits without my financial backing. I'll be selling my shares back to the other partners at cost. No profit, just recovering my initial investment. Jonathan's confusion was deepening into something else. Not anger, not yet, but the beginning of understanding that something was very wrong with this conversation. Mom, what's going on? This doesn't sound like you. On the contrary, sweetheart, this is exactly like me. Your father and I built something meaningful with our lives. We worked for every dollar, we earned our success, and now I want to ensure that our legacy does the most good possible. I reached across the table and took his hand. I love you more than anything in this world, but the best thing I can give you isn't money. It's the opportunity to build your own success story. Vanessa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Excuse me, I need to use the restroom. She left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I could feel the rage radiating from her, even as she tried to maintain composure. Jonathan watched her go, then turned back to me with worried eyes. Mom, what's really going on? Is this about Vanessa? Did something happen? Why would you ask that? Because you're essentially writing me out of your will while making it sound like you're doing me a favor. And Vanessa looks like she's about to have a panic attack. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Talk to me, please. I wanted to tell him everything. Wanted to pull out Patricia's investigation report and show him every text message, every lie, every calculated manipulation. But I couldn't. He had to see it himself. He had to arrive at the truth on his own terms, or he'd never believe it. I'm doing what I think is right, I said simply. Trust me, Jonathan. Even if it doesn't make sense right now, trust that I have your best interests at heart. Before he could respond, Vanessa's voice echoed from the hallway. She wasn't in the bathroom. She was on her phone, and she wasn't being quiet enough. I don't care how late it is, I need to talk to you now. Her voice was sharp, desperate. She's cutting him out. Some bullshit about charitable trusts and earned success. $200,000 a year, that's it. The apartment's being sold, everything's going to charity. Yes, I'm serious. Jonathan's face went white. He stood up slowly, and I could see the realization dawning. This wasn't a private call Vanessa thought she was having. This was her true reaction, stripped of performance and pretense. 2 years, Vanessa continued, oblivious to the fact that her voice was carrying. 2 years of playing the perfect daughter-in-law, dealing with her sad widow routine, pretending to care about her boring stories. And for what? A fucking trust fund that barely covers rent in Manhattan? I stayed seated, letting Jonathan move toward the hallway on his own, letting him hear his wife's real voice, her real feelings, her real priorities. The prenup doesn't mean anything if there's no money to inherit. I talked to Marcus. He said I should just get pregnant now, force her hand. But if she's already changed everything— Vanessa's voice cracked with genuine emotion. Not grief, not love, frustration, fury at a plan falling apart. Jonathan appeared in the hallway doorway. I couldn't see his face, but I heard his voice. "Vanessa." The sudden silence was absolute. Then sounds of fumbling. Vanessa's voice artificially bright. "Jonathan, I heard everything." His voice was hollow. "Who's Marcus? And what do you mean, get pregnant now to force her hand? Baby, you're misunderstanding." "Am I?" His voice rose. Because it sounded pretty clear. 2 years of pretending, playing the perfect daughter-in-law, making my mother think you care about her when really you've been counting down the days until she dies so you can inherit money. That's apparently the only reason you married me. That's not... Jonathan, you're twisting my words. Then explain. Explain what you meant by force her hand with a pregnancy. Explain Marcus. Explain any of this in a way that doesn't make you sound like you've been running a con on my family for our entire marriage. I stood up quietly and walked to the doorway. Vanessa was backed against the wall, her perfect composure completely shattered. Her face was blotchy, mascara starting to run. Jonathan stood 3 feet away, his whole body rigid with a hurt so profound it was almost physical. "Jonathan," Vanessa tried again, reaching for him. "I love you. You know I love you. I was just upset, saying things I didn't mean." "Do you?" he asked simply. "Do you love me? Or do you love what I represent? Access to my mother's money, this lifestyle, the apartment, the clothes, the image you've built for your followers." "Of course I love you," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to my ears. "Then tell me the truth." Jonathan's voice broke. "Tell me the truth about the credit cards, about the debt, about the divorce lawyer you've been consulting with. Tell me the truth about why you really married me." Vanessa's eyes flickered to me, and in that moment, she knew that I'd been investigating, knew that this entire evening had been a trap, knew that she'd walked right into it. "You," she spat at me, venom replacing desperation. "You did this. You've been sabotaging us from the beginning. You never wanted Jonathan to be happy. You wanted him to stay here in this mausoleum, mourning his father forever, taking care of you. You manipulative bitch." "Vanessa," Jonathan's voice was sharp, but I stepped forward calmly. "I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped subsidizing it. The apartment I gave you, the money I invested in Jonathan's firm, the gifts, the dinners, the checks I wrote every time you mentioned something you wanted. I gave you everything, and you repaid me with contempt. You were buying affection." Vanessa shot back, trying to make me feel obligated to you. It was pathetic. Maybe it was, I agreed quietly. Maybe I was pathetic. A lonely widow desperate for family, willing to overlook your cruelty because I loved my son and wanted him to be happy. But you made a critical miscalculation, Vanessa. You thought generosity was weakness. You thought grief made me stupid. You forgot that I built an empire by knowing exactly who I was dealing with. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, the one Gerald had prepared. This is a copy of the investigation report. Every text message, every credit card statement, every consultation with divorce attorneys, every lie you've told my son for 2 years. Read it or don't. But you're done pretending in my house. Jonathan took the envelope with shaking hands. "Mom, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. But you needed to see who you married. Not from me telling you. You needed to see it yourself." I looked at Vanessa, who was crying now. Real tears, for probably the first time since I'd known her. "You have 24 hours to move out of the penthouse. After that, I'm changing the locks. You can take whatever you actually own, but anything I paid for stays." "You can't do that," Vanessa said weakly. "I absolutely can. The apartment is in my name. Gerald made sure of that 2 years ago." I turned to my son, my heart breaking at the devastation on his face. "I love you. Everything I've done has been to protect you. I hope someday you'll understand that." I walked back to the dining room, sat down at my place, and picked up my wine glass with a steady hand. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa's sobs, Jonathan's quiet voice asking questions I couldn't make out, the sound of my son's marriage ending in real time. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than burying Richard, harder than selling my company, harder than anything I'd ever faced. But it was also necessary, and necessity had always been my specialty. The house was silent after they left. Jonathan had walked out without another word to me, his arm around Vanessa's shoulders, even as she sobbed into his chest. Even in his devastation, even knowing what she'd done, he was still trying to comfort her. That's who my son was, kind to his core. Too kind, maybe. The kind of kindness that made him vulnerable to people who knew how to exploit it. I sat alone in the dining room until the candles burned low, staring at 3 plates of pot roast that no one had finished eating. All that work, all that preparation, all those years of trying to build a bridge to a woman who'd seen me as nothing more than an obstacle with a bank account. Margaret found me there close to midnight. She didn't say anything, just started clearing the dishes with her quiet efficiency. After 15 years, she knew when I needed silence and when I needed someone to tell me it would be okay. "You did the right thing," she said finally, carrying plates toward the kitchen. "Did I? Because it doesn't feel right. It feels like I just destroyed my son's life." "You didn't destroy it. You saved it. There's a difference, Mrs. Westbrook, even if he can't see it yet." I went to bed that night but didn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on Jonathan's face, the way his whole world had shattered in the space of an overheard phone call and a manila envelope full of evidence. I'd done that to him. Yes, Vanessa had created the situation, but I'd orchestrated the reveal. I'd turned his life upside down with surgical precision. Was that love? Or was it control disguised as protection? Sunday passed with no word from Jonathan. I called twice, texted 3 times, got nothing back. Monday morning, Gerald called to tell me Vanessa had hired an attorney. "She's threatening to sue for unlawful eviction and emotional distress. It's baseless, but she's going to try." "Let her try," I said tiredly. "We have documentation for everything." "Eleanor, she's also threatening to go public. Social media posts about how you manipulated your son, turned him against her, used your wealth to control their marriage." I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. "Let her. The truth is a pretty solid defense. And somehow I doubt her followers will be sympathetic when they learn she married Jonathan for money while planning her exit strategy. Just wanted you to be prepared." 3 days after the dinner, Jonathan finally came to see me. I was in the garden, pruning roses the way Richard had taught me decades ago, cutting away the dead parts so the healthy parts could thrive. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. "Mom," he said from behind me, and I turned to see my son looking like he'd aged 5 years in 72 hours. Dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd worn to dinner Saturday night. "Sweetheart," I said, setting down the pruning shears and pulling off my gardening gloves. "I read the whole report. Every page, every text message, every credit card statement, every email with the divorce lawyer." His voice was flat, emotionless. Shock, probably. The kind that comes after the initial devastation when you're too exhausted to feel anything anymore. "She left yesterday, moved in with Brittany, already posted on Instagram about toxic family dynamics and choosing herself. I'm sorry." "Don't." He held up a hand. "Don't apologize. You were right. About all of it." "I was so stupid, Mom. So incredibly stupid." "You weren't stupid. You were in love, or you thought you were, and she was very good at being exactly what you needed to see." He sat down on the garden bench, the same one where Richard used to sit and watch me work. "I keep going back through everything, every moment, every conversation, trying to figure out when I should have known, when the signs were there that I missed. Jonathan, the miscarriage," he said suddenly. 3 months into our engagement, she said she'd been pregnant, that she'd lost the baby. I proposed because of it, because I thought we were going to be parents, and I wanted to do the right thing. He looked at me with hollow eyes. There was no baby, was there? That was probably a lie, too. I sat down next to him and took his hand. "I don't know, but sweetheart, it doesn't matter now. What matters is what you do next. Patricia Chen, your investigator. She gave me the name of a good divorce attorney. I have an appointment tomorrow." He laughed bitterly. "Married 2 years, divorced by Christmas. Dad would be so disappointed in me. Your father would be proud of you for having the courage to leave when you realized it wasn't right. He'd be proud that you're not letting pride or embarrassment keep you in a destructive marriage." I squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you." We sat in silence for a long time, watching the autumn leaves drift across the lawn. The same lawn where we'd played catch when he was little. where Richard had taught him to ride a bike, where we'd held his graduation party and 2 years ago, his wedding reception. "Can I stay here for a while?" Jonathan asked finally. "Just until I figure things out. I can't be in that apartment. Everything there reminds me of her, of the life I thought we were building. This is your home. It always has been. Stay as long as you need." He moved back in that afternoon. Margaret made up his old room, the one we'd preserved exactly as it had been when he left for college. That night, I made chicken piccata, and we ate dinner together in the kitchen, not the formal dining room. Just the two of us, like it had been in the months after Richard died. "She called me," Jonathan said, pushing food around his plate. "Vanessa, crying, saying she made mistakes, but she really does love me. That your investigation was biased, that she can explain everything if I just give her a chance." "What did you say?" "I told her I'd read the messages where she called me boring, where she told her friends that being married to me was the price of admission to this lifestyle, where she talked about waiting for you to die like she was counting down to Christmas morning." He set down his fork. "You can't explain that away. You can't make that mean something other than what it obviously means." The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Vanessa fought it at first, demanding alimony, half the value of the penthouse, compensation for her contributions to Jonathan's career. Her lawyer was aggressive, but Gerald was better. In the end, she walked away with nothing except the money in her personal accounts and whatever possession she could prove she'd bought with her own income, which, as it turned out, was almost nothing. Her Instagram following plummeted when the truth came out. Not from me. I never said a word publicly, but from other people who'd been watching the drama unfold. Former friends who shared screenshots, followers who felt deceived. The carefully constructed image of the elegant young woman with the perfect life and the loving family crumbled as quickly as it had been built. 6 months after that dinner, Jonathan met someone new. Sarah, an architect at his firm. Smart, kind, genuinely warm. She came to Sunday dinner and asked about my life, my business, my memories of Richard. She laughed at my stories and offered to help with dishes. She didn't perform affection, she just offered it, simply and sincerely. "I like her," I told Jonathan after she left. "I know you do, I can tell." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. "And Mom? I'm taking it slow this time. Really slow. No rushing into anything. No grand gestures. Just getting to know someone and seeing where it goes." "That sounds very wise." "I learned from the best," he said, kissing my forehead. Eventually. A year after that terrible Saturday night, I was having coffee in the garden when Jonathan found me. He sat down with an envelope in his hands. "What's this?" I asked. "An apology and a thank you." He handed it to me. Inside was a card with a single sentence in his handwriting. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me hate you for a while." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You never hated me." "No, but I was angry. Hurt that you'd investigated Vanessa, that you'd set that whole dinner up like a trap. It felt manipulative, even though I knew you were right about her." He took my hand. "But I understand now. You did the only thing you could do. If you just told me, I wouldn't have believed it. I needed to see it myself, and you knew that, even though it meant I might not forgive you. I would have accepted that," I said quietly. "If it meant saving you from a lifetime with someone who was using you, I would have accepted you hating me forever. That's what love is, isn't it? The real kind. Not the kind Vanessa performed, but the kind you and Dad had. The kind that makes hard choices because they're right, not because they're easy." We sat together as the morning sun climbed higher, warming the garden where Richard and I had spent so many Sunday mornings, where Jonathan had played as a child, where someday, maybe his children would play too. The house didn't feel too big anymore. It didn't echo with loneliness or ring with the ghosts of humiliation. It was just home, my home, built on foundations strong enough to weather whatever storms came. And if those storms came in the form of a 29-year-old influencer who mistook kindness for weakness, well, I'd faced worse and survived. I'd built an empire from nothing. I'd buried my soulmate and kept breathing. I'd protected my son from his own blind spots, even when it meant breaking his heart. I was Eleanor Westbrook. I'd never lost a negotiation in 30 years of business, and I sure as hell wasn't about to start losing now. 3 hours after one phone call, everything had changed. just like I'd promised myself it would. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop letting people mistake your generosity for weakness. Stop tolerating what shouldn't be tolerated. Stop pretending you don't see what's right in front of your face. And sometimes, just sometimes, love means letting someone fall so they can learn to stand on their own, even when it breaks your heart to watch them do it.